So hello, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Melinda Cooper. I'm an occupational therapist, and I'm the product manager for the occupational therapy line at Pearson. And as Sherry said, we're also joined by Tina Eichstadt, who is a speech language pathologist, and she is the product manager for the achievement line at Pearson. And we're both very pleased to be able to introduce you to our speakers today. So we're going to start with Dr. Anna Barnett, who's a professor of psychology in the Centre for Psychological Research at Oxford Brookes University in the UK. She has a BA in psychology and physical education and a PhD in child development from the University of London. Her general area of research is the development of motor control and coordination in children and young adults, with a special focus on DCD. Her publications in this area include work on the diagnosis, description and developmental course of DCD, examination of perceptual motor difficulties, and also exploration of the genetic contribution to motor difficulties. Anna worked for several years as chair of the steering committee of the International Society for Research in DCD and is a co-author of the International Clinical Practice Recommendations for DCD. Anna is principal author of the DASH-2 and also a co-author on the movement ABC3. We also have Dr. Sheila Henderson, who's currently a Reader Emerita at the Institute of Education, University of London. She began her professional life as a physical education teacher and throughout her career has maintained an interest in how we all learn motor skills, as well as in those who find this difficult. Over the years, she's published research on the motor difficulties of children with cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, Downs and Asperger syndromes, as well as children and young adults with DCD and specific handwriting difficulties. Sheila is principal author of the movement ABC3, and she also collaborated with Anna Barnett and Beverly Scheib to co-author the DASH-2. And lastly, but not least, we have Virginia Wise-Berninger, who has a PhD in psychology from Johns Hopkins University and has been a clinical and research psychologist on the faculty of Harvard Medical School from 1981 to 1983, Tufts University School of Medicine 1983 to 1986, and University of Washington 1986 to 2016. I think we do have some feedback there. Sheila, maybe if you pop yourself on mute. She's now Professor Emerita focused on translating research findings into tools for professional practice. She has authored or co-authored more than 200 research articles and book chapters and published 19 books. At the University of Washington, she was principal investigator of NIH grants for 25 years and a tenured faculty member who taught courses and advised master's and PhD students. So we'll begin our session today with some information about the DASH-2 from the test authors. And then Tina is going to host an interview with Dr. Berninger to discuss her perspectives on the utility of the test in research and practice. And then we are planning for some time at the end for questions. So as Sherry said, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can put them into the chat box and we'll get to as many of these as we can. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Anna Barnett. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to stop my camera. So thank you so much for the introduction and inviting us to give this webinar. Sheila and I are really pleased to have this opportunity. I think we have some feedback on the line. I don't know if that's anything that can be sorted while I'm speaking. But yes, we're really pleased to have this opportunity to tell you about the latest revision of DASH-2. And we'd like to first acknowledge our co-author shown here, Beverly Scheib. So this is the plan for today's webinar. We'll start with an introduction to outline the aim and uses of DASH-2, then focus on the content of the 4 of the core tasks, which provide standard scores. We'll then outline the range of further quantitative and qualitative information that's particularly useful for intervention planning. And after our presentation, as you've heard, we're really honoured to be joined by Virginia Berninger, recently retired from the University of Washington. She's a great supporter of handwriting, and we'll hear how she's used the DASH in her own research and alongside her own tests. So, as a starting point, handwriting's a really important component of writing more generally. And over the years since we first developed the Dash, there's been, of course, an increasing use of technology for writing. But despite this widespread use of computers, handwriting still remains an important skill for recording information, expressing thoughts on paper, and communicating ideas to others. And although technology is used in many education settings, certainly in the UK, at all ages, students continue to spend a portion of the day performing tasks involving handwriting, probably in the US as well, and regular assessment is often based on handwritten work. And this includes class tests and formal written examinations. And in many vocational and workplace settings, handwriting is also required. So, as long as handwriting is used in education and the workplace, we'll need a way to measure handwriting skill and particularly to identify and support those who have difficulties in this area. So, the aim of the original editions, and now DASH-2, is to provide a reliable measure of the speed of handwriting while also taking account of legibility. And although the title of the test focuses on speed, it's obviously important that handwriting is legible as well as fast enough for the task in hand. So, to provide a reliable and useful measure, our approach has been to include a range of handwriting tasks. Other tests just use one task, such as copying, but different tasks have very different demands, and including a range gives a more comprehensive and detailed assessment of handwriting skill. And DASH-2 yields quantitative data for each of the tasks included, plus an overall total score. But it also provides rich qualitative information on an examinee's writing under different conditions, and this is what can be particularly useful for intervention planning. Now, this figure helps to explain our reason for including different writing tasks. The boxes in yellow here show the different components of writing that incorporates cognitive, linguistic, perceptual, and motor skills. At the highest level, we see that some writing involves coming up with ideas of what to write, then composing the phrases and sentences, deciding how to spell words, and finally forming each letter, which involves pen control to make the letter strokes on paper. And the range of tasks included in DASH, shown here, have been designed to incorporate different aspects of this writing process. We'll look at these tasks in more detail later, but just to introduce them here, our graphic speed task on the right taps into the perceptual motor elements of pen control. Our alphabet writing task focuses on letter formation. Copying tasks involve writing sentences, and our free writing tasks involve all components from generating ideas right through to forming letters on the page. And you can see that each of these tasks has very different demands. This helps the examiner understand the contribution of different components to handwriting performance. And the combination of different types of information helps provide a reliable and detailed assessment that can be used for a variety of purposes. So one of the main uses of DASH-2 is to identify those with handwriting difficulties. We know that many different groups struggle with aspects of handwriting, including those with dyslexia, dysgraphia, and developmental coordination disorder, or DCD. If we can identify handwriting difficulties early, we might reduce or avoid the potential negative consequences of poor handwriting. Secondly, by quantifying the level of handwriting speed, DASH-2 can also help determine eligibility for extra support. This might include accommodations in the classroom, for example. DASH can also contribute to diagnostic assessment, for example, of dysgraphia or DCD. Also, the combination of both quantitative and qualitative information from DASH-2 provides a very detailed description of handwriting performance that can help us understand any difficulties experienced and assist in planning appropriate intervention. And used over time, DASH-2 can also be helpful for monitoring progress or evaluating the effectiveness of intervention. Finally, DASH-2 can also be employed in various ways in research and has been used with many different groups of students with handwriting difficulties. And we might hear more about this from Dr. Berninger later on.
So, now that you know a little about the aims and uses of DASH-2, there's time to give you a very brief history of its development. The first edition, entitled DASH, was published in 2007 and provided UK norms for students aged 9 to 16. Before then, there were tests of handwriting available, but few which focused on the speed of handwriting, and none which included a range of tasks that truly represented activities commonly encountered in a classroom setting. As Anna has just noted, this was one of our main objectives. Once education and allied health professionals began to use our new test, it became so popular that we were soon asked to extend it for use in further and higher education. This led to the publication of DASH-17 Plus in 2010, with norms for 17 to 25-year-olds. Since then, both tests have been used extensively, not only in the UK, but also in other countries, with several translations into languages which share our alphabetic writing system. DASH-2 emerged in March of this year. As before, it can be administered as a one-to-one test with an individual examinee, or as a group test, either with whole classes or small groups, depending on need. The revision of a test is a major undertaking involving many stages. Guidance on the steps to take are provided by professional bodies around the world. In the US, the most important is probably the American Psychological Association in collaboration with the American Educational Research Association. As shown on this slide, the steps to be taken include setting up an expert panel, taking account of user feedback, that's really, really important, conducting the necessary pilot work on changes to be made, conducting the main standardization study, and building upon the reliability and validity data already published. For this audience, it might be useful to know that a study including students from the USA has recently been undertaken, and data from this study will be available shortly. In recent years, it's become common for test developers to produce norm tables suitable for use in different countries. For DASH-2, the standardization sample comprised individuals from the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. These countries were chosen because they share similar demographics, educational systems, and service provision for students with special needs. To be sure that each subgroup was truly representative of the country concerned, however, each country sample was stratified according to their own census data, and careful comparisons of the data from each country were undertaken. Since none of the differences between the countries were statistically significant, it was then possible to produce combined norms with confidence.
We'll now move on to give a brief description of the core DASH-2 tasks and their scores. So like its predecessor, DASH-2 includes 4 core tasks, which are shown on this slide: copy best, alphabet writing, copy fast, and free writing. You can see that most are very short, 1 or 2 minutes. There's just one longer task, free writing, which involves 10 minutes writing on a given topic. These 4 core tasks are used to calculate a total composite score. In addition, we have a supplementary task, graphic speed. This does not involve writing letters or words and is therefore not included in the total, but used as a supplementary measure, as we'll see later. So the first DASH-2 task is copy best. This requires the examinee to copy a sentence from a sentence strip. In DASH-2, there are different sentences for younger and older examinees, as well as alternative sentences within each age group. These are sometimes used when retesting is needed. So before starting the test, you need to select and prepare the appropriate sentence strip based on the examinee's age. The examinee will need their own pen or pencil and a new sheet of lined paper from a pack. Here you can see an example of a sentence strip and an image of the top of the lined paper. You explain that the task is to copy the sentence in their best handwriting over and over until you tell them to stop. They should position the sentence strip and line paper in a way that makes it comfortable and easy to see and to write. You tell them to look at the sentence while you read it aloud, and that after a short time, you'll ask them to make a mark of 2 lines in their writing, as you can see on the slide. Chapter 3 of the DASH-2 manual provides very precise guidance, including the verbatim scripts to use, the demonstrations to give, the prompts permitted, and suggestions for group administration. Later in the test, the copy fast task is administered. This is the same as copy best, except for instructions to now write as quickly as they can while making sure the text is still legible. And in both these tasks, the number of legible words per minute is counted. Here are examples of the text produced for copy best and copy fast by a 13-year-old. We can see the mark made after 1 minute. This has been circled by the examiner afterwards. And overall, performance is very slow for their age. We can see the increased number of words produced for copy fast compared to copy best. We call this the copy speed difference score, which in this case was 1.5 words per minute. This is actually less than you would expect for a child of this age. Most children speed up more than this from copy best to copy fast. In between the copying tasks is the alphabet writing task. Here, the examinee is required to write the alphabet in the correct sequence over and over until you tell them to stop. They should use lowercase, not capital letters, and not join them up. The examiner first demonstrates a few letters written unjoined in lowercase. You tell them to write as quickly as possible, but to be sure every letter can be read. They begin on a clean sheet of paper. These 2 examples of alphabet writing illustrate the very different writing styles of a younger and older student. We score the number of correctly sequenced legible letters, and we do include any that are joined, written in capitals or reversed. For the free writing task, DASH-2 provides a choice of 2 topic spider diagrams, the My Life topic and the alternative Past, Present, Future topic. The examinee needs their own copy of one of these spider diagram sheets and a new sheet of lined paper to write on. You first ask the examinee to look at the main title in the centre of the spider diagram and write it on the top of their lined paper. Explain you'll be asking them to keep this title in mind and to write about it. And the spider diagram gives them some ideas of things they could think about and write about. Be sure to tell them that these are only suggestions. They could write about one, several, or none of these. Also, they could write about things that are not true, perhaps things they hope for or dream about. In this task, unlike any of the other tasks, before writing, we encourage the examinee to discuss and plan what to write. Try to elicit ideas from them as you chat about the subtopics on the diagram. After your discussion, give them 1 minute for preparation before writing. During this preparation time, some may wish to sit quietly just thinking. Others may choose to circle some of the subtopics or jot down a few key words. Instruct them to use their everyday handwriting in a running narrative and not to just write a list. You'll need to ask them to make this mark of 2 lines every 2 minutes and to carry on writing as before, and this provides a profile of the performance across the 10-minute period. Here's an example of the free writing task written by the same 13-year-old we saw before. We can see the mark made every 2 minutes. This has been circled afterwards by the examiner. Very little has been written in 10 minutes, but all words are legible, so they're counted. Overall, the handwriting is immature for a 13-year-old with very large letters and lack of joining. We can see that their writing is relevant to the topic, but there are several spelling errors. If there had been any words that were totally illegible, these would be counted up separately and not included in the speed score. For each of these 4 core tasks, we convert the raw score to a scaled score with a mean of 10 and standard deviation of 3. The sum of the 4 core tasks is used to obtain a total standard score with a mean of 100 and standard deviation of 15, scales which of course you'll be familiar with. Percentile ranks are also available for the total standard score. We also suggest these cutoff points to describe the score ranges which are likely to be educationally or clinically relevant. At or below the 5th percentile is usually described as slow handwriting for the examinee's age, between the 6th and 15th is moderately slow, and at or above the 16th percentile is considered in the typical range, reflecting no difficulty with handwriting speed.
So far, Anna has focused on the 4 core tasks contained in DASH-2 and the quantitative data which feeds into the total score. I will now turn to the additional information that the test provides. Some of this is quantitative, which I will begin with, and some qualitative, which we'll come to in a moment. When taken together, of course, all of this information is designed to be useful when planning an intervention programme. There are 3 scores which link directly to the tasks Anna has described. The first, the copy speed difference score, is very important in that it provides a measure of the examinee's ability or inability to increase the speed of their writing when required. We all know of children who can write legibly, perhaps very neatly, but simply cannot write fast enough to keep up with the demands of the classroom. Conversely, I'm sure you know of students who respond to your request to write faster, but then produce work that's almost unreadable. Theoretically, this measure is also interpreted in relation to the more general ability to self-regulate. With Professor Berninger, she might mention this a little later. The next 2 scores supplement the scaled score obtained on the free writing task. There are the percentage of illegible words and the profile of performance over the 5 2-minute periods. Together, these 2 scores are useful in that they make us think about 1, whether we need to conduct any further analysis on how the student is forming letters, words, etc., i.e. the legibility, and secondly, whether the student can actually sustain their ability to generate text over a period of time. And if not, we need to ask, why not? Is it a problem with composition, spelling, punctuation, or is it a physical problem which leads to fatigue? Finally, there's the graphic speed task, which we'll turn to next. Some students, as you will know, have difficulties with problems of movement and coordination. Others do not. As Anna noted earlier, our graphic speed task was designed to provide a measure of the ability to control a writing implement, which was completely independent of any language element. Basically, what the examinee is required to do is to make a mark like an X in a specified way, as many times as possible in 1 minute without error. This slide shows a correct example, followed by 4 others, each of which illustrates an error. For example, When the diagonal lines do not intersect in the inner circle, as in the third example, that is an error. After the demonstration, the examinee attempts this task for 1 minute. The examiner then counts the total number of circles attempted and the number of errors made. By examining the relationship between these two scores, we can then start to think about whether lack of motor control is something which needs further investigation or is not. Moving on to the more qualitative information that DASH provides, many of you will be familiar with the distinction between process and product in your clinical work. When thinking about handwriting, what we mean by process is what can be observed while the examinee is writing, and by product, what we can learn about the handwriting from the finished piece of work. There's not time today to go into detail about how you might collect and report all of this data. There's a whole chapter on this in the test manual. But briefly, these are some of the issues that you might address. Here are a few examples of the general things that you might observe during an assessment session. They should include the ability to follow the instructions, concentration within and between tasks, evidence of anxiety, restlessness, etc. Now, you might note in your report that you think these have affected the student's ability to perform the DASH-2 tasks, but it's also important to consider why they might be also affecting the student's writing more generally in everyday life, and whether these factors must be considered when planning an intervention programme. Handwriting is a physical skill involving the whole body, not just the hand and the eye. You might have your own checklist for observing the physical aspects of handwriting. We use the 4 Ps as a rule of thumb. These include posture, pen grip, paper position, and the ability to control pressure or force. Finally, as an examinee writes, information can sometimes be gathered on the way letters and words are formed and spaced on the page, whether they're consistent in size, slope, etc. Often, however, one cannot see these features clearly. The child might be leaning over and hiding the writing, and they're best analysed and recorded from the finished product. So, after the examinee has left the room, your first task will be to score each DASH-2 task carefully and record the necessary information on the record form. But in order to better understand the scores the student has obtained and to begin to form ideas about issues that might need attention during an intervention programme, your next task should be to look at the finished product for each task and just ask yourself a few questions. These might include: does the examinee have a problem with legibility or readability? And if so, how do we decide and describe it in more detail? In the guidance on legibility that we provide in DASH-2 manual, we suggest examiners think of the 7 S's. I'm sure you're familiar with all of these: the shape or form of the letters, the size, the slant and slope, whether the spacing within and between words is adequate, whether the body of work sits on the line, and whether there's any evidence of shakiness or tremor. So, although the free writing task is the one that gives you most information on legibility, we also suggest that it's important to determine whether any issues that the student has with legibility is consistent across tasks. You should also think about the relationship between speed and legibility and how a student manages that in an appropriate way across all of the tasks. And in this case, the graphic speed task should be included in your thinking. From the content of the free writing task, you can also say, what can I learn about any difficulty the examinee might have in generating ideas, in grammar, punctuation and spelling, and so on. Now, although DASH-2 isn't designed specifically to look at these things, you can think about them, and there's space to summarise all of the qualitative observations you've made on the back of the record form.
Thank you, Sheila. And now, just to close our part of the presentation, we'd like to present a quick case study of a 10-year-old child who we'll call Ben. So Ben completed the DASH-2 as part of a comprehensive diagnostic assessment for dyslexia, and the results are shown here. This assessment followed ongoing concerns about the child's difficulties with reading, spelling, and writing. Now, Ben was described as a bright, conscientious, and imaginative child who was doing well in mathematics, but struggling otherwise in the classroom. Even with extra input for his reading and spelling, his school had seen rather little progress. So Ben had a verbal IQ of 120 when tested on the Wessler Intelligence Scale for Children, the WISC. He had a reading age of 8 and a spelling age of 7.
Yes, this is Ginger. I lost sound.
Yeah, me too.
Anna, I'm not sure if you're still speaking, but we can't hear you.
Shall I carry on, Melinda?
Yes, please, Sheila.
Okay.
It
So-
looks like her slides are gone too.
Oh my goodness. Well, if people can remember what was on the last slide, I'll do my best to carry on. So during the DASH-2, Ben followed the instructions and he concentrated very well. He wrote with his right hand using a conventional grip on the pen and showed good posture at the desk. Now, recall that on the left of the last slide in blue, you could see the profile of the 4 core scaled scores. And this showed a large discrepancy between 3 of the core tasks, which have low scores, scaled scores of 6, and the free writing task with a score of 13 in the average range. The total standard score was 87 and Ben's percentile rank 19. On the right of the last slide that we saw, you could see that the graphic speed score was 13, which was well within the average range, suggesting that Ben could cope well with the perceptual motor aspects of pen control. He probably didn't have any movement difficulties that required further investigation. The graph below shows performance for each 2-minute period in the free writing task. And in that case, he continued to write a similar amount in each period with only a slight amount of drop off towards the end, which is very common. And all the words in the free writing script were considered legible. Now, Anna was then going to show us examples of the scripts from the copying tasks, which did show that when he had the opportunity, he could actually write legibly. And he could also respond to the speed instruction by speeding up. His main problem, however, in the free writing task, which I'm so sorry you're not going to be able to see, was that he completely lost control of the letter forms. Had a lot of problems with legibility, particularly with the writing not sitting on the line. In the alphabet task, we can see that he could form letters quite well, but struggled with some aspects of the sequence. I think it's important now maybe just to say that how we were going to summarize this was that his main problems were in spelling and with some problems in writing, but they were not the major ones. Of course, his diagnosis of dyslexia could be confirmed, and he did need help with handwriting, but he wouldn't be the sort of child where handwriting was the major problem. So to complete our talk, I'm going to summarize. There was a slide available. You have the PDF that Anna shared. Sorry, I'm just reading what Melinda has said. I think I can summarize. Basically, what we've demonstrated is the value of the information from DASH-2 for a variety of purposes. Sometimes the standard scores alone are helpful in terms of identifying those with difficulties and determining eligibility for some form of extra support. Standard scores for handwriting speed can also contribute to the diagnostic process. However, there are times when more detailed information from a DASH-2 assessment is really useful in terms of helping to describe performance in detail and to develop an intervention plan to support a student. The impact of this can then be monitored over time. As mentioned earlier, DASH has also been used in various ways in research settings, and we now hope to hear about some examples of this from our guest, Dr. Virginia Berninger.
Thank you, Sheila, and I'd like to welcome Dr. Berninger again to this part of the talk. So we'll take a few minutes now and we'll listen to you. Dr. Berninger, I'm going to ask you just a few questions, and we're excited to hear your responses. We know that you've used the DASH in your research for years. How did you use the original DASH in your research?
Well, after meeting Anna Barnett and Sheila Henderson at an Oxford University conference in 2004, I told many in the United States about DASH 2007, including those at a national writing conference in 2012, organized by the Handwriting Collaborative, that convinced over half of the United States to reintroduce the requirement to teach handwriting beyond grade 1 after it had been dropped. Next, Anna Barnett and Sheila Henderson collaborated with our University of Washington research team on a study of DASH measures, which uses scaled scores for age, and University of Washington handwriting measures, in which Z-scores for grade based on longitudinal studies were administered, as well as normed measures of scaled scores or standard scores for age or grade for word spelling and written composing. These measures were correlated with handwriting, spelling, composing. Many of them were. But the three best measures that we identified for reliably differentiating among dysgraphia, impaired subword level handwriting, dyslexia, impaired word level reading and spelling, and from oral and written language learning disability, ALLD, impaired syntax level language by ear, mouth, eye, and hand, and typical controls without specific learning disabilities were a measure from the University of Washington studies of writing legible letters in alphabet order within the first 15 seconds of writing the alphabet from memory, and the DASH copy best, which you've heard what that measures, writing all the letters in the alphabet in one's best handwriting, and then DASH copy fast, writing that sentence with all the letters in one's fast handwriting. So as a result of this, we started using the DASH copy best, copy fast, and alphabet 15 in a lot of our studies, those used to diagnose dysgraphia, those used to assess response to writing instruction, those used to assess the brain bases of handwriting, and the brain's response to writing instruction, particularly writing instruction that teaches across levels of language, handwriting, spelling, composing, because we did a lot of research that showed it was important to not just teach handwriting in isolation, but also across all three levels of language. And the genetic bases of dysgraphia. So the brain research showed that those with and without dysgraphia before instructional intervention for writing were not observed after intervention, and structural connectivity, white matter integrity, or graph cluster coefficients, gray matter connectivity, was found that there is the brain responds differently if you have dysgraphia than if you don't. A genetic basis for dysgraphia was discovered, and with genetics, you're looking for phenotype, clinical behavioral markers of underlying genotypes. So when we looked for the phenotype genotype connection, we found that the best phenotype clinical measures that marks the genotype for dysgraphia were between DASH copy best and the molecular genetic allele RS79382 and alphabet 15 and the molecular genetic allele RS3743204. Both of these genetic alleles are located in the gene candidate DYX1C1. So there is a genetic basis for dysgraphia, and it differed from that for dyslexia and ALLD and the typical controls.
That's fantastic. Appreciate hearing those connections. Here's my second question for you. So findings from your research, how do those inform the way DASH can be applied in practice?
Oh, good question. It is often assumed that all specific learning disabilities are dyslexia, and dysgraphia is not diagnosed, at least in the US. When we were getting a lot of treatment non-responders referred to us in our research and clinical centers, we would assess, and in many cases, we diagnose them as having dysgraphia based on DASH measures and some of our alphabet measures from our own research, including alphabet 15. And once they were diagnosed as having dysgraphia and received specialized instruction validated in research for dysgraphia, voila, all of a sudden they responded and their handwriting improved, and we saw transfer to spelling and to composing. So this was reason for hope, even though there is a brain biological basis, brain and genetics for dysgraphia. It's treatable. They can be taught to write legible, automatic, quality handwriting and to transfer that handwriting to word spelling and sentence text composing if it's diagnosed and they get the correct kinds of intervention. So in genetics, there's an emerging field of epigenetics, and that is showing that learning may depend on what happens in the instructional environment and affects mRNA translation in the genome, and is not just the result of chromosomes, DNA, at time that you inherit at conception. Now, on the other hand, the findings between DASH copy best and one genetic allele, and between alphabet 15 and another genetic allele that was different for dysgraphia and different for dyslexia and different for ALLD, has two important messages. First of all, educators should not be blamed just because some students struggle in learning handwriting, which has a genetic basis and transfer of handwriting to spelling and composing. They can learn, but it's going to take more time and specialized instruction. The second lesson is professionals should have empathy for parents who may have struggled themselves in learning handwriting and or observed others in their extended family who did because of genetic risks for handwriting problems that runs in their families. One of the most challenging aspects of consulting with schools is the conflict between parents and educational professionals when the parents are very uptight because their children are having some learning problems and they feel the school doesn't understand it. And it's been very helpful to get the schools to understand, okay, this family has a huge family background of being at risk or having the writing problems. And if we can just be compassionate, why they're so uptight. And then I was more able to get them to work together on behalf of the student.
That's so helpful and so timely and meaningful for current conversations that so many of us are having in schools as parents and as professionals. Let me ask you one more question before we turn it back to Melinda and the DASH-2 authors. As the author of the PAL-2 Reading and Writing, Dr. Berninger, and looking at your extensive work and research using the original DASH, how can we use the DASH-2 with the PAL-2 Reading and Writing when assessing or providing instruction or intervention for handwriting difficulties? Give us some guidance or advice there.
Okay. But first, I want to acknowledge the contributions of Beverly Scheib, who was a co-author along with Anna Barnett and Sheila Henderson for both the DASH and the DASH-2. DASH-2 is a valuable new assessment tool for handwriting and other writing skills. And it does not have to be used with measures on the PAL-2 RW, Reading and Writing Diagnostic Test. It could be standalone. Only measures of handwriting, other writing skills, and writing-related processes for K to 6 are included in the PAL Reading Writing 2001 and the PAL-2 Reading Writing PAL-2 Reading Writing 2007. Even though our research program based on Z-scores extended a larger grade range. Now, I want to explain why. Our measures for assessing handwriting were developed for kindergarten through 6th grade, where we developed the measures, then we screened a large number of classrooms, schools, and school districts to identify kids who were performing below the 25th percentile, the lower limit of the average range. And then we evaluated alternative interventions for students at that grade level to improve in writing or reading. So there was a good reason to focus on those grades. In contrast to the original DASH with norms ages 9 to 25, DASH-2 has norms, as you've heard, for ages 8 to 25 plus, and can be used, and this is such a contribution, in early childhood, age 8, through middle school and high school, post-high school, college, post-college, and the world of work to document the need for instruction and or accommodations for handwriting and other related writing skills. Another valuable contribution of the DASH-2 is that those who are assessed are encouraged to use their preferred usual handwriting format: manuscript, unjoined letters, cursive joined letters, and or a combination of both. And there are norms for interpretation of the format used. Those being assessed can also use their preferred handwriting tool. According to the test manual, only for DASH-2 alphabet writing tests should cursive be discouraged. Now, I want to emphasize why this is so important. At least in the US, schools vary greatly into whether they're teaching handwriting beyond grade 1, and if so, are they teaching just manuscript printing or just cursive or both? And I find it very useful when you interview teachers and you find out what they have been taught. Then you can use the norms that are provided in the manual to interpret whether they used only manuscript, only cursive, or a combination. I find that very helpful in diagnosis and planning intervention. Okay, DASH-2 can be used to assess both handwriting and handwriting related skills. And the graphic speed that you heard about, I find very useful to assess the perceptual motor speed, because there are these fine motor skills that can be relevant. And the free writing to assess both the planning using the spider diagram and the composing over time intervals is a very nice supplement to other measures of writing that are out there. So, DASH-2 and PAL-2 reading writing measures could only be used together to create a cross-level profile, either before for purposes of diagnosis or after for purposes of RTI, response to intervention, for individuals of selected age or grade levels when norms are available for both tests, the DASH and the PAL-2. However, it is important to keep in mind that even though names of measures are similar on both tests, the measures differ in task requirements and exactly what they measure. So sometimes when they're comparable, you could administer both. But I also point out that the PAL-2 reading writing and the revised user guide for the PAL-2 reading writing provide information on screen intervene kindergarten through 2nd grade, and the lesson sets that are available for PAL has a lesson set with the most effective handwriting approach that we found that really turned a lot of kids around in terms of becoming successful handwriters in the first 2 grades. That could be used, and then from then on, starting at age 8, you could start using the DASH-2 measures and recommended interventions for ages 8 and above. And also PAL-2 Math and PAL-2M and the revised PAL-2M user guides have resources for assessing and teaching numeral handwriting, written math fact retrieval, and written math calculations. That is the handwriting requirements for arithmetic. We're learning a lot of kids who have trouble with handwriting, have trouble with arithmetic, and sometimes the schools don't realize initially that it's because of their handwriting problems for the numerals and the written math. So it's something to be aware of. And finally, I just have to mention, in our collaborative work with Anna and Sheila, we found the Henderson and Barnett MABC movement assessment battery and related checklists that we use the 2nd edition, but now there's a 3rd edition, and I highly recommend that you use it along with the DASH-2 for the reasons that Sheila reviewed for you. And I think I'm going to stop there so you can have a chance to ask some questions.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Melinda, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thanks, Tina, and thank you to all of our presenters for really, really insightful presentation. We do have a few questions that have come in, and if you have other questions, you can type them in. We don't have a lot of time left, but I'll just address a couple that have come in so far. 2 that are sort of related. So up to what age can dysgraphia improve? So if a student's in 5th grade and has problems with reading, writing, and spelling, and their handwriting is illegible, what are the chances that their handwriting will improve? So Dr. Berninger mentioned that students with dysgraphia can be treated and can demonstrate legible handwriting after learning. Is there an age limit to where dysgraphia cannot be easily treated due to their already learned handwriting patterns? Maybe Dr. Berninger, if you could take a first stab at that.
We did a lot of our interventions for children diagnosed with dysgraphia and other learning disabilities. And we did these intervention studies up through 9th grade, and we found evidence if the child is appropriately diagnosed. And there are interventions for dysgraphia in the upper grades. We've published a lot of the resources for that. And yes, they still could improve if they get the right kind of specialized instruction for their instructional level where they are later in schooling. And I'll be quiet now. Others may have something.
Thank you, Sheila. I'm not sure if you have anything to add to that or if you'd like me to move on to the next question.
I could just add one thing, that the older, of course, the individual becomes, the alternatives of typing become an option. And that's something that everybody always talks about, whether typing is a better option. But of course, what has to be remembered is that you have to teach typing too. What you tend to find is that, oh, good, let's give them a computer. But in fact, that's only the beginning if you're going to use it as an alternative to actually handwriting.
That is so true. And I just have to add one thing. With handwriting, use your dominant hand to the opposite side of the brain. It's only in late middle childhood, early adolescence, that the part of the brain that allows the right and the left side of the brain to communicate starts to be available. That's when you have to teach touch typing. They use both hands, they look at the screen, they do not look at the key. And we did several research studies showing if you teach touch typing, then the typing can be very effective. Don't just give them a computer.
That's excellent, very practical advice. What age was that, Dr. Berninger?
We did the studies with grades 4 to 9, but it was most effective grades 6 to 9 to teach the touch typing.
Perfect, thank you. We have probably time for just one more question, which is, we're frequently asked to work on sentence writing with children who cannot read. What are your thoughts on that? And we have a related question about working on letter writing when the student cannot identify the letters. So again, I might ask Dr. Berninger to start the answer to that one.
We did quite a bit of research on that topic. I can't emphasize enough. You have to find out why they're having reading problems. And there are problems in the PAL assessment tools. There's procedures that have been well validated in research. You have to find out if they have dyslexia, and then it's a word reading and word spelling problem and work on that. If they have ALLD, it's a syntax level reading comprehension problem. And unless you have specialized instruction for that, you just keep teaching phonological decoding, they're not going to get better. In the interest of time, may I suggest questions about that could be directed to Tina, who will contact me, and I will give her some information that could be shared with people who participate in this webinar. And now I want to be quiet so you can hear from others.
And just to reiterate that we are at time, but if you do have questions that haven't been answered, you can put them into the survey that you'll be receiving when the webinar finishes, and we will be able to get an answer to you. I think that's actually all we have time for, unfortunately, because we are at time. So thank you very much to all of our speakers today. Hopefully you've taken something useful away, and enjoy the rest of your day.